Yo guys, yo man. Alright, now the topic of this video, guys, is going to be about the afterlife. The afterlife, that's like such an interesting subject. Look at this area that I'm in, guys. Look at this area that I'm in, guys. Look at this area that I'm in, guys. The topic of this video, guys, is going to be about the afterlife. And this is so fascinating and interesting. The afterlife is such a fascinating topic regarding like what's going to happen to us after we die and etc and stuff like that. It's kind of a bit dubious because nobody really truly honestly knows about the true like nature of like death and dying and what's actually going to happen to us after we pass away. It's a little bit dubious and tricky. It's kind of a little bit unknown. Like it's kind of like such a dubious topic, like the nature of death and dying, because it's like so like unknown. It's like there's no clear explanation for what's going to actually truly happen to us after our time is up on planet Earth. It's kind of like a little bit, it's very, very much dubious, and it's kind of like it's very much like it's something that's like, it's kind of like it's an unexplainable subject, you know what I mean? It's an unexplainable subject and topic. There's no like clear explanation or whatever. There's no like any sort of like clear explanation on as to like the true nature of like death and dying and whatever. It's such an interesting subject though to think about and to contemplate on, man. What's gonna happen to us after our time is up? Obviously, if you look at religion, there's so many different like sort of like hypotheses, like all the different world religions, they kind of theorize and they offer their own sorts of explanations. If you're looking at like religions from India, you got like one of the most popular forms of like explanations for what's going to happen to us after we die is like, if you're looking at religions from India, one of the explanations is that like such as Buddhism, maybe perhaps Hinduism, Sikhism, I'm not too sure, but basically reincarnation, that's like one sort of explanation. And to me this is like very I think that reincarnation is very logical, man. I think reincarnation actually does make a lot of sense. Reincarnation is actually somewhat, to me, especially if you're looking at like Buddhism, Sikhism, Hinduism, reincarnation actually does make a lot of sense. To me, actually, it does seems to make a lot of sense, because if you think about it, everything kind of recycles itself, doesn't it? If you think about it carefully, everything sort of does recycle itself. You gotta honestly think about this, like think about this so carefully. You have to think about this. Everything does kind of like recycle itself. Like if you think about it like very carefully, like let's just say like you know, like an animal dies, its body just kind of absorbs back into the ground, and it's like body it's like the cellular cells inside of its body kind of like sort of the cells and like the physical like atoms inside of the animal, it starts to like just get reabsorbed into the ground, and then it just turns into like fuel for some other type of life force. It gets recycled. Everything sort of recycles itself. And so in that type of way, I think that, you know, death and dying, I think after we die, we are pretty much, our consciousness, it has to be like recycled in some sort of way. And so reincarnation does seem very plausible in that type of way if you think about it like that everything recycles itself, and after we die, our consciousness, our like so-called spirit, soul, that's going to recycle as well, and then it's going to be kind of like a continued cycle. It's an endless cycle, and then we're just going to be coming back and stuff like that. That's why reincarnation to me makes somewhat sense. It seems like it's somewhat logical, because if you think about it again, everything does kind of recycle. Our bodies are like everything around you, the grass, the physical like biological material, like any type of like most, like if you think about it, nearly everything in our world kind of just like it gets born and then it dies, and then it kind of respires, and then it starts to get reabsorbed into something else, recycles. And that's why I think that reincarnation is actually somewhat, it does seem to be logical to me regarding like the afterlife, that we are born and then we're going to pass away, and then we're probably going to come back in some other type of way. And I think that makes somewhat logical sense to me, because if you look around our world, it all kind of is recycling itself continually. And I think that's why, you know, reincarnation to me seems very plausible, because it's all about like recycling. Everything recycles. That's why I think that even like an animal, it's born and then it dies, its body starts to decompose into the ground, and then it starts to get reabsorbed, and it's like bodily like structure and like material, like all of like the physical parts of the animal, it starts to just get like kind of like the fuel and it's like life force gets sucked into something else, and then it's like it recycles, you know what I mean? So like, again, if you look at like the world religions, if you look at religions from India, certainly Sikhism, Buddhism, Hinduism, reincarnation is like it's like a very talked about, it's like very much like mentioned in like a lot of different religions from India, and I think there is a lot of like plausibility to like the reincarnation hypothesis, guys. I think that's like very much, I think that it intuitively makes sense, doesn't it? Like reincarnation, it does kind of make a lot of sense, because everything kind of recycles itself in our world. Everything does seem to like recycle itself. And then, okay, other than reincarnation, there's also, if you look at like the Abrahamic faith, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, the afterlife, it's mostly about like heaven and hell and etc. and stuff like that. That after we were born, basically we were put on this earth by God, and we're sort of being judged and like kind of tested, and then after we die, if we passed his like judgment and test, we get to go into paradise, and if we failed that judgment and test, we get to fall down into hellfire. And so we either, the afterlife is all about like, if you were good in this life, according to like the Abrahamic religions, if you were good, you get into like some type of paradise, and it's like eternal bliss and happiness and joy. But if you were bad, you get put into like hellfire, and that's eternal pain, suffering and torture. So that is actually, to me, that's a little bit kind of funny. Is that type of, like the Abrahamic faiths, they have like a weird, like the eternal damnation, eternal bliss, that's kind of like very bizarre. Is that like very credible? I'm not too sure. Some people would say it's like, that makes perfect sense, I don't know. It's kind of all speculation. When we talk about like things like related to like the afterlife and all these sorts of things, it's always going to be like speculative, you know what I mean? There's no like clear-cut consensus on any of this. There's no way to like verify any of this. It's like, it's all like dubious, you know what I mean? But you know, the Abrahamic faiths, they offer the explanation that after we die, if you've been good according to the Abrahamic scriptures, the Bible, Quran, Tanakh, we're going to go to heaven. If you've been bad, you're going to burn forever in hellfire, eternal torment or eternal bliss, depending on if you've been good or bad in this life. To me, that isn't really, to me, one of the biggest issues with the Abrahamic faith is eternal damnation, eternal torture. That doesn't make any logical sense, guys. Think about this so carefully. If you like the Abrahamic God, if he's real, he's literally like torturing people forever in hellfire. That is like very sinister and psychopathic. I would understand that if someone in this life, if they were like very sinister, if they were bad, if they did something like that's very like unjust and cruel, I'd also say that was like a serial killer or serial like a rapist and stuff like that. And fair enough, you gotta punish him somehow, but if you like throwing him into hellfire and burning him alive for eternity, how's that like a fair punishment? That seems like it's like very much sadistic and cruel, and that's why the Abrahamic faiths are kind of a little bit, they don't really make too much sense, because eternal damnation, that just doesn't logically make any sense to me, man, you know what I mean? Putting someone in like, if someone does something bad in this life, alright, fair enough, they might have done something wrong, but then like after they die, they just get tortured for eternity. That doesn't make any logical sense. That's why it's like such a big like letdown. I don't know why so many like Christians, Muslims, Jews, they don't really think about that too carefully. Eternal damnation, does that make any logical sense? No. You do something bad, alright, fair enough, but then after you die, you just get burned alive for eternity. Does that make any logical sense? That's why, you know, like the Abrahamic faith regarding like the afterlife, the heaven and hell explanation, hell is so like sinister and evil. If there is like such a God out there in our universe, and if some type of all-knowing, all-powerful, omniscient, loving God like made it so that after you die, if you did something bad, you just get burned alive for eternity, that God is probably evil, guys. That God is not like really good, is he? If like a lot of people, like, they don't really think about like, their religions too carefully, do they? Think about this. If you're like a Christian or Muslim, that means that you believe in millions of people like just burning alive for eternity in hellfire. Does that make any logical sense? Probably not. Most people are so dumb and ignorant, man. Most people are like freaking so dumb and ignorant, man. Does that make any logical sense? That if you do something bad in this life, alright, fair enough, but then after you die, you just get tortured alive for eternity. Does that make any logical sense? No, it doesn't. Most Christians, maybe Muslims, they don't really want to too deeply think about that. How can that make any logical sense? That if you do something bad in this life, fair enough, but then after you die you just get tortured and burned alive for eternity. That doesn't make any logical sense. Heaven makes a little bit of sense. If you do good, you just stay alive. I don't know, the afterlife, the Abrahamic faiths, the eternal bliss or eternal damnation, that is kind of it's a little bit dubious to me. Obviously it's all like speculative. There's no like clear-cut evidence for any of this anyway, about like there actually being like heaven and hell or reincarnation again. But you know, I'm just like trying to really think about the afterlife, because we're all born, and then inevitably, gradually you're going to turn older, then you're going to slowly tend to pass. Then we're all going to slowly age, go through the aging process, turn old. Then you're probably going to respire and die at some point, and then that's like going to be very shocking. And then you're going to have to like face this like inevitable or reality of death and dying, which is so like terrifying. Even though it's like we're always like surrounded by death. You know, it's kind of a little bit interesting if you think about it like that, man. We're always like surrounded by like death and dying. Death is like everywhere. Like if you look around the environment, like you see like leaves that get like freshly made on a tree, and then they slowly ripple, like kind of cripple up, and then they kind of like collapse down back onto the ground, and then you know, animals get born and die, and you know, insects and all that type of stuff. It's always like death is like all around us, man. It's very, very interesting. It shouldn't be too shocking and terrifying, because death is like it's all around us. So that's why I think that you shouldn't really be too like worried about like death and dying, because it's like we're always like surrounded by death and stuff like that, in some way or form or shape. You eat meat comes from like a mutilated dead animal, you know what I mean? Everything about our world's all related to like death and dying. That's why I don't think that death is something that you should be like fearful of, like death, because it's something that we're all like kind of exposed to already. But still, because everything you like feel, everything around us is kind of like just like being born and then respiring, you know, grass, leaves, any type of living organism, born, then it dies, and then it respires. Then it's like a continually endless cycle, and it's kind of very interesting and magical, isn't it? The afterlife is so like dubious and tricky to think about, to talk about this, because it's all like there's no like clear-cut explanation for the afterlife, is there? It's all like very dubious and tricky. It's all like speculative, but it's something that we all have to come to terms with in the end. Like we're all going to like have to face the reality of death and dying. So it's like kind of like, it's like something you have to think about to some extent. To some extent, you got to think about like the true reality, the true nature of death and dying, because we're all going to have to like suffer from like some type of like we're all going to have to face death in the end, like the reality of death and dying. It's so bizarre, but again, I actually talked about this in a different video as well, but you know, like death is so fascinating, because we already were sort of like dead to begin with, you know what I mean? Before you were born, prior to you coming out of your mother's womb, you were pretty much like dead. Like before we were born, we were pretty much dead, weren't we? We had no conscious experience and whatever. Then we were born, and then we came alive, and then we started to develop some sort of conscious experience, guys. I think that death is kind of like just going back to that state, that initial state right before we were born. It's like pretty much that state of like non-existence, which is like very difficult to like wrap your head around. That whole thing about like non-existence, not having any type of like conscious experience, because it's like we're very much like conscious, like everything about your life revolves around your conscious experience, doesn't it? Like that's all you're familiar with. You're not familiar with like not existing, not having any sort of conscious experience. But if you think about it, if you go all the way backwards throughout your like the history of your life, if you go all the way back to like the point where you were just born, coming out of your mother, right before that point you were like pretty much not even like conscious. You had no conscious experience. You were pretty much like dead. So I think that's why you shouldn't really be scared of death and dying, because it's something that you already have like a lot of like experience with already. Because if you go back through the history of your life, you were pretty much already dead, weren't you? Then you came alive, and then you start to develop some sort of conscious experience. Most likely you're going to go back to that initial state again at the beginning. That initial state of like death, that is so fascinating to me. That whole thing about like not being alive, not being born, is so fascinating. It's so bizarre as well. The true nature, reality of death and dying is so like speculative, man. It's so difficult to think about it. It's so like confusing as well, because there's no clear-cut explanation. There's no like clear-cut explanation. There's no like any sort of like clear-cut explanation, man. It's so like confusing. The true like nature of death and dying. There's no like, it's not like it's like all of this is like very clear-cut and obvious. Like when we die, this is what's gonna happen to us. This is what's gonna not happen to us. It's all like, it's so speculative. There's no clear-cut explanation whatsoever for it. But it's very, very important to think about. It's such an important subject, guys. The afterlife, the true nature of like death and dying. What's going to happen to us after our time is up? It's all like a big fat mystery, guys. But it's so important that you contemplate on it. You think about this so carefully. Death, dying, the true like nature of death and dying is so important that you think about this and you contemplate on this. You kind of like meditate on this, man. It's so important that you don't like try and ignore the reality of death and dying. It's so important, but there is no clear-cut explanations. You have all these like different world religions, they try and offer you the explanation, but it's always going to be like it's dubious. There's no like proper explanation for like what is actually going to happen to us after our time is up, after we respire, pass away, go into the ground and like disappear, you know what I mean? There's no actual proper explanation, but it's like very interesting to kind of like to think about this, to meditate on this type of like concept of like the afterlife. If there even is an afterlife, what if it's just like we go into like a state of non-existence, we just start to like slowly become brain dead and stop existing? I think that's also very much like possible, plausible. Death is like so fascinating, but it's like so dubious because there's no proper explanation on it, as to like what's actually going to happen to us after our time is up. It's kind of like very, very much dubious and tricky to come to terms with this, to come and grasp this, and whatever you want to call it. The true nature of like death and dying. It's like very, 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 very dubious, isn't it? It's very, very, very dubious and tricky to think about this. And again, the world religions, the different world religions, they offer their own sorts of explanations. The Abrahamic faiths, they have like heaven, hell. Then you got the Indian religions, they talk about reincarnation. And there's other religions as well, they might talk about like coming back as a ghost or something like that. And there's probably a plethora of other world religions, and they all have their own sorts of explanations. But it's kind of like, to me, it's like very much, it's all like dubious, you know what I mean? There's no reason to argue about what is actually going to happen to us after we die, or to argue about like the true nature of the world and like whatever, and argue about religion, because it's like there's no like, it's not like it's written in the sky or anything like that. It's not like it's clear cut in that type of way. It's all dubious and speculative, guys, and you gotta have to just accept that there is no like proper explanation for why we're even born and alive, and then why we have to die, and what's gonna happen to us after we die. There's no like proper explanation for any of this. It's kind of like very much dubious and tricky. Even if you believe in some sort of religion, it's like still very much dubious and tricky, and it's like something that we can't really come to terms with properly. That's like so fascinating though. Damn, it's like so like fascinating and interesting to think about this, to contemplate on like the afterlife and all that type of stuff, because it very much is like speculative. There's no clear-cut proper explanation, but it's like so fascinating, isn't it? It's very, very, very fascinating, man. Still though, guys, so many people think they know what's going to happen to us after we die. It's like, that's like so laughable, because it's like it's such a tricky, like dubious topic. There's no clear-cut explanations for any of this, guys, but it's still good to think about this. Think about this, to contemplate on this, to meditate on this, guys. The afterlife, what's going to happen to us after our time is up. Damn, I feel like literally high right now, with the light going down on my face and the greenery in the background. Damn, look at that, guys. Sunlight, man, looks pretty sick. The afterlife, guys. That's what I'm talking about. The afterlife. The true nature of death and dying. What's going to happen to us after we die? It's all speculative. I know for sure that it's probably some people say nothing happens. I think that's kind of a little bit too pessimistic, nihilistic. I think something definitely is going to happen to us after we die, for sure. I think so. Because think about it, right before you were born, you were pretty much already dead. And then you came alive, and then you're going to die again. And something has to happen in that same type of way, exactly as how you were born. You had no conscious experience, then you start to develop the conscious experience, then you're going to slowly die. And you're probably going to, like, something's probably going to happen. We're probably going to come back in some other type of way. And it's so, like, proper, and it's so, like, interesting to think about this. It's so fascinating, interesting to think about this, guys. The afterlife. The afterlife is so, like, interesting. Such an interesting, fascinating, truly amazing, like, thing to think about is the afterlife. What's going to happen to us after our time is up? It's all, like, speculative. And throughout our history, so many people have been trying to, like, theorize as to what is actually the true, like, nature and reality of death and dying. It's like, it's always been, like, kind of pointless though, because it's kind of like, it's almost like paradoxical, because in order to, like, know what's going to happen to us after we die, you have to die yourself. It's not like you can do, like, an experiment. You can kill someone and then you can, like, see what's happening to them after they die, because they, like, you can't go into, like, their consciousness and see what's going on, you know what I mean? So, like, death is, like, it's ultimately kind of meaningless to, like, argue about death and to talk about, like, what's going to happen to us after we die. It's kind of, like, very meaningless, very pointless to, like, debate and argue about that, because it's like, you can't really do any experiments, you can't really do any type of proper research. You can't really even, like, think about that too deeply, man. It's all just, like, speculative. There's no, like, any type of clear-cut explanation. It's all, like, speculative, and, like, there's no, like, proper explanation. The afterlife, what's going to actually happen to us after our time is up, it's kind of, like, very dubious, guys. It's, like, very, very dubious and tricky, man. There's no clear-cut explanation, guys. There's no real reason to even, like, argue about it, debate about it, man. It is pretty fascinating, though. It is very, very fascinating to think about this, though, guys. The afterlife, the true nature of death and dying. But it's still so pointless to argue about it, though, because it's not like you can do, like, an experiment. You can, like, kill someone and you can see what's going on with their conscious experience, man. That's so, like, dubious. You can actually, like, kill someone or something like that. You could see, like, what's going on with their conscious experience and stuff like that. What's going on, what's happening to them and whatever. It seems like it's kind of, like, meaningless to argue about it then. To talk about it. To argue about anything, like, about death and dying. Kind of pointless to talk about it. About death and dying and whatever, man. It's so meaningless to argue about it. About, like, the nature of, like, death and dying, because it's like you can't, like, see what's going on to, like, the other person. You can't really see what's going on, you know what I mean? What's happening to their consciousness when they're passing out and when they're, like, going into the afterlife. It's, like, very, that's why it's, like, it's always gonna be, like, speculative. There's no, like, clear-cut explanations or anything like that. It's always gonna be speculative. There's no clear-cut explanations or whatever. I think it's, like, very good to, like, think about this, though, guys. The afterlife, what's going to happen to us after our time is up. The true nature of death and dying. The true nature of death and dying. The afterlife, that's so interesting, man. The true nature of death and dying. What's going to happen to us after we die? To me, it's, like, so fascinating. It's so dubious. The afterlife. What is it all going to be about? What's actually going to happen to us after our time is up? It's all a big fat mystery. It's all dubious, guys. There's no clear-cut proper explanation, and it's like some people still argue about it, which is kind of meaningless, man. Some people argue about it. It's kind of arguing about it. It's kind of dumb. Arguing about death and dying, what's the point? Because it's not like you can kill someone, see what's going on with their brain, see what's going to happen to their first-hand experience. You can't do that because you can't do any type of experiment to prove what's actually going to happen to us after we die. Some people would say maybe you could try and like measure the brain activity, and it's kind of pointless. You can't. That's why it's so like, damn, the sunlight and the heat's making me so lightheaded. But guys, the afterlife is so like fascinating, but it's so meaningless to talk about it because it's like there's no clear-cut explanation. You know what I mean? It's not like you can actually go into someone's consciousness and see what's going to happen to them after they pass away, man. It's kind of a little bit meaningless then to talk about the true nature of death and dying. Death and dying, man, it's so like weird and hard to like think about this. Death and dying, man. What's going to actually happen to us after our time is up? It's all like very much a mystery. It's all like a big fat mystery. It's all dubious. There's no clear-cut explanation. It's always good to like think about this, to contemplate on this, to think about it, to meditate on it, on these like very important, deep existential questions like the true nature of death and dying. What's going to happen to us after our time is up? To me, it's like so fascinating, man, that it's all just a mystery. There's no like, nobody's ever like properly documented like the true nature of death and dying all throughout like the history of humanity, our entire history and stuff like that. There's never been anyone that's like properly documented the nature of death and dying. It's always been like a mystery all through our history, even up until now. It's so fascinating and interesting, guys. Now, all throughout the full scope of human history, death and dying has always remained a mystery, hasn't it? There's been no proper explanation offered as to what is going to happen to us after we die. It's all a mystery, guys. There's been no proper explanation given at all. It's all a mystery, guys. There's no proper explanation. It's all a mystery. But it's very fascinating, man. There's been no proper explanation given, man. I swear it's always been like a mystery. There's been no proper explanation given at all as to like the true nature of death and dying. There's been no proper explanation given, man. It's so fascinating. Guys, I swear it's been no one's ever like figured it out, man. For thousands of years. It's all been like a mystery, man, I swear. It's been like no proper explanation given whatsoever. To me, it's like so funny and fascinating that no one's properly even like figured it out, man. It's for like thousands of years. It's like so like funny and so like dubious, man, and tricky to think about this for like thousands of years. Thousands of years, man. No one's like even like figured out like the true like nature of like death and dying. So like funny to me. It's all like there's no proper clear-cut explanation whatsoever. It's all just like a dubious trick mystery. It's all like fascinating though. What is like, let's just talk about this, the afterlife, reincarnation, heaven, hell. There's probably some other sorts of, what other explanations are there for what's going to happen to us after our time is up, after we die? Probably, I think one other explanation could be that maybe we just turn into ghosts. I don't know, like in Star Wars, you know, like after Anakin Skywalker dies, he just turns into kind of like a ghost. Maybe that might be like what's going to happen to us, but it's kind of a big fat mystery really, guys. And there's probably a bunch of other explanations, but it's all like ultimately all kind of ends up falling short, because, you know, nobody's actually respired, passed away, died, and then it's not like we know what's properly going to happen to us after we die. It's so like mysterious, so dubious, so tricky. Death, that we all have to die, but we don't know what's going to happen to us after we die. Isn't that kind of funny? It's like this kind of like horrible world that we're born into, this like world. We turn older slowly, and then eventually we're gonna have to die. That is like hilarious indeed, guys. Isn't that hilarious? But anyway, that's something that you're gonna have to like think about on your own. Isn't that kind of a little bit funny, man? The nature of death and dying. The true nature of death and dying. What's going to happen to us after we die? It's so funny, man, that we're all born and we're gonna die, but nobody really knows what's going to happen, guys. It's like, it's such a big fat joke, man. I swear, it's kind of comedic and funny a little bit. It's all like dubious, tricky. I swear, man, it's all like dubious and tricky or whatever. Like, there's no like proper explanation or whatever. It is kind of funny though, but still no proper explanation. That's like what's going to happen to us after our time is up, after we start to like respire and pass away. So fascinating, man, and dubious, and tricky, but it's still like so good to think about this, the nature of death and dying and all that type of stuff. It's so fascinating that we all have to die, but there's no like very clear-cut explanation as to what's going to happen to us after we die. It's a dubious, tricky thing. It's like this. It's all just a mystery, isn't it? It's kind of funny, man. Isn't that kind of funny that we all have to die, but there's no like proper explanation on what's going to happen to us after we die? Through our history, no one's properly figured it out. You know what I mean? The nature of, like, the true nature of death and dying. No one's figured it out. It's all just a mystery. Mystery is funny though, isn't it? It's all a mystery, but there's no clear-cut explanation, and we're all gonna have to we're all gonna have to face death anyway in the end. But it's like, it's so dubious and tricky though, because no one's figured it out. Figured it out. But we're all going to have to die in the end. It's kind of like that is such a big fat shame, but it's like funny as well. Death and dying. We're all gonna have to die at some point. The afterlife is kind of dubious though. Heaven, hell, reincarnation. Maybe we might just or eternal blackness. I don't know. It's so dubious and tricky to think about this, because it's not like something that you can actually verify. It's just so like a pain in the backside, especially with the Abrahamic faiths, because if you don't do the right things, you might burn alive for eternity in hellfire. Is that fair? I don't know. It's like interesting, isn't it? The afterlife, guys, is such a fascinating subject and topic, but it's no clear explanations whatsoever. Truly, it's fascinating though that we're all born and we're all going to have to die. Every living organism's going to have to die, and then you're gonna have to come to terms with like the reality of death and dying in that like end moment. Truly, it's fascinating, guys. Truly, truly, it's fascinating. Damn, the sunlight's hitting my face. Pretty chill day, ain't it? Damn, I feel great, man, on the grass. Just like making videos outside here. Probably gonna do this a lot more often. Anyway, the topic of this video, guys, is the afterlife. What is going to happen to us after we die and after our time is up? It's all a big fat mystery. It's dubious, but it's so fascinating and important to like meditate on this. Even though it's all dubious, there's no like proper explanation. There's all these like theories that might try to explain what's going to happen to us after we die, but it's all dubious and tricky. It's all dubious and tricky, man. It's not like we can actually properly figure it out. It's not like there's any sort of like proper explanation given. But it's important to think about this, guys, isn't it? To think about this, to contemplate on this. Damn, feels great to be out here. Feeling good, guys, feeling good. It's a good day, man. Filming this video talking about the afterlife, death and dying, it's not that bad, is it? It's a pretty good day, but I'm still... The afterlife is like all dubious and tricky, guys. Oh, I got that sunlight hitting my face, man, I swear. Damn, man. Feeling very chilled right now, guys, but you know, like, still... The afterlife, guys. We're all gonna have to die, but nobody knows what's gonna happen to us after we die. It's like so tricky. Damn, guys, it's so freaking tricky to think about this. Love being out here, man, in the freaking grassland environment. Here in England, all around here. Pretty sick, guys. But anyway, the afterlife, nature of death, the true nature of death and dying, it's all a dubious mystery, guys. It's all a mystery, ball. But think about it, for thousands of years, all of humanity has been thinking about this question, contemplating on this question, but there's no proper explanation given. It's kind of like very dubious. Very, 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 very dubious and tricky to think about this, guys. There's no proper explanation given, but it's all like dubious and tricky. And the true nature of death and dying, what's going to happen to us after we die? It's so important that you think about this, guys, carefully. Meditate on this, think about this, contemplate on this. Heaven, hell, reincarnation, who the hell knows? It's all a mystery, but we're all going to have to die in the end, so it's something that you got to think about a little bit. Put your brain on it, guys. Think about it carefully, a little bit. You got to think about it a little bit, guys, at least a tiny little bit. So many of us, we just go through our day-to-day lives. We don't really think about these very big, important, existential questions. You got to a little bit. Put your brain on it, guys. Just think about it a little bit. Have a deep thinking about this. Like, kind of breathe in and out. Meditate yourself, and then kind of think, like, try and contemplate on this death, dying, what's going to actually happen to us after our time is up. It's an important question to think about, guys, the true nature of death and dying. Ultimately, it's like very much dubious, no real clear-cut explanations, but it's like important to think about this, guys. Very, very important to think about this, to contemplate on this, to meditate on this, the true nature of death and dying. We're all gonna die at some point, so you gotta think about it, guys. You gotta think about this, contemplate on this, meditate on this. Super, super duper important, guys, and the video's about to end. The afterlife is a mystery, but we're all gonna have to die at some point.